In the US, below the president, there is a clear line of succession and pecking order, with the vice president serving as the president's second-in-command and as a backup should the president die, be removed from office, or be indisposed for a short time. Yet in the UK, there is no vice prime minister. The closest British equivalent is the office of deputy prime minister, which unlike the office of vice president is not mandated to exist by law, but is instead given at the prime minister's discretion and is rarely ever used. But why is this? Why does the US have a formalized number 2 position and a backup leader, but the UK does not? To begin, in the US, it is not just the vice president who can take over if the current president is dead or removed from office. After the vice president, there are a total of 16 backup presidents in waiting, comprising, in order, the Speaker of the House, the President pro tempore of the Senate, the longest serving senator, who is then followed by the 15 members of the cabinet in order of the seniority of their office. In order to ensure that this line of succession remains intact even in the case of nuclear attacks, all these people are never allowed to be in the same location, with one alternating member being set aside as a designated survivor in a secure location during large political events where every other high-ranking member of the government is expected to attend, such as the State of the Union address and the presidential inauguration. Yet in Britain, no such rigid pecking order or line of succession exists. Instead, there is the office of Deputy Prime Minister, but this is a much more recent invention, with the office not existing before modern times, being first given to Clement Attlee in 1942 under Winston Churchill, and was not formalised until 1995 when it was given to Michael Heseltine under Prime Minister John Major. But being Deputy Prime Minister is very different to the office of Vice President, which even in the US is not regarded as a hugely important position, doing little besides representing the US government when the President is unable to attend a specific event, or acting as President of the United States Senate, being in charge of maintaining order in debates, but only casting a vote in the case of a tie. John Adams, the first Vice President, famously called it the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. And John Nance Garner, Franklin Roosevelt's first Vice President, said the office was not worth a bucket of warm piss, as it is famously an office with little responsibility, unless of course the sitting president dies or is impeached and removed from office. But if that's the case in the US, in the UK, the office of Deputy Prime Minister is even less well respected, with many people unaware of its existence, and unlike the office of Vice President, it is not always in use. The position is currently, as of 2021, being held by Dominic Raab, but before that, the office had been vacant for 6 years. To understand why the US has a Vice President at all times, and the UK does not, we need to look at the different structure of the two governments and the roles of these two offices. First, the Vice President, when acting as President of the Senate, acts as an important go-between between the two branches of government, the legislative, in the form of the Senate, and the executive, in the form of the President. This is not needed in the UK because unlike in America, where the President is a separate elected office from Congress and voted in as a separate ballot in a national election, the Prime Minister is also a Member of Parliament, or MP, elected to represent a local constituency just like any other. This is a big difference between the British and American systems. Since they are elected separately in America, it is possible to have a president belong to one party and Congress controlled by another, whereas in the UK, the Prime Minister is always from the same party that controls Parliament. Thus, there is no need to have a Vice President to act as a go-between between the leader and the legislature, as the Prime Minister regularly attends Parliament already and has the backing of a majority of its members, and in fact has to take questions from all other members and debate the leader of the opposing party every Wednesday. And instead of a hypothetical British Vice President, parliamentary sessions are conducted by a dedicated, impartial, non-partisan Speaker of the House. Both countries also have different methods for how each leader is elected and how they are nominated by their respective parties. In the US, the president is elected by a national vote, although the Electoral College complicates everything, making it more an election by each of the states. Plus, in the US, the two major parties select their candidate for president only a few months before the election through a national convention. While before that, and outside an election cycle, the parties don't really have a single leader. In the UK, things are much more centralised. The different parties elect one central leader to have at all times from one of their number who already sits as a Member of Parliament that will serve as their candidate for Prime Minister when an election is called. For example, David Cameron was leader of the Conservative Party for 5 years before being elected as Prime Minister in 2010. The Prime Minister is thus typically the leader of the largest party in the House of Commons and sits as an MP themselves, Although since the UK does not have a written constitution, this is mostly by convention rather than law, and is not always strictly the case. Parties can also remove their leader anytime they want, not just through impeachment. If they lose faith in them, they can call an internal party election, which can result in a new party leader, and if that party is in power, a new Prime Minister as well, such as Margaret Thatcher, who never actually lost a general election but was forced from office by her own party after they lost faith in her ability to lead and was replaced by John Major. When this happens, the new Prime Minister sometimes calls an early general election to give themselves a fresh electoral mandate. This is not always the case, and if they want to, they can just govern as Prime Minister for the rest of their predecessor's term. As was the case with Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who took over from Tony Blair in 2007, and whilst he was elected as the leader of the Labour Party, he was never elected as Prime Minister in a general election, although he did serve. A Prime Minister holds their office as long as they can command the confidence of a majority of MPs. Put simply, this means do a majority of MPs think the Prime Minister has the support of enough members to govern effectively, and do they want them to remain as leader of the government? A Prime Minister can be removed if they lose a vote of no confidence in a simple majority. The government is then forced to resign and call a new election. However, this is unlikely to happen whilst the Prime Minister's party holds a majority of seats in Parliament. Britain's first past the post voting system, while not guaranteeing one party gets a majority of seats after an election, does make it far more likely, making a vote of no confidence unlikely to succeed. The last time this happened was in 1979, when Labour Prime Minister James Callaghan lost a vote of no confidence by one vote and was forced to call an early election. This is another big difference between American and British politics. In the US, elections are locked in every 4 years and can happen no sooner or later. So even if the president dies or is removed from office, a new president can't be elected until the next election cycle. This is why presidents and vice presidents are elected at the same time, so that if the vice president takes over, they have some kind of electoral legitimacy. Although technically the office of vice president is elected separately, as part of all the complications caused by the electoral college, in practice, the person running for president will nominate a person to be their official running mate, and the party at large will go with the presidential nominee's decision. Whereas in Britain, elections are held a maximum of every 5 years, but can be called earlier by the Prime Minister if 2/3 of Parliament agree, or if the government loses a vote of no confidence by a simple majority. This means the UK doesn't really need a vice president as backup in case of death or the removal of the leader from office, since the parties can elect a new leader/Prime Minister whenever they want or need to, and if a new Prime Minister is put into power, they can call an election immediately to give themselves a clear electoral mandate so they don't come off as some kind of Machiavellian power grabber. So if the UK doesn't need a vice president or Prime Minister to serve as the number 2 in government, or as a leader in waiting in case of death, then why would the Prime Minister have a deputy at all, if one isn't required by law or necessity? And what does a deputy Prime Minister do? This and more will be answered in part 2. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for watching. If you want to see more from Newsreel History, remember to like, comment and subscribe to see more content, and I'll see you next time.